Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes, and I'm so happy you're with us today. This week, we celebrate a joyous Seek Reality tradition that goes back now for many years, actually. Lots of people know about the Spiritualist movement, which began with the Fox Sisters as a 19th century spiritual movement in the US, and it soon spread to Great Britain, France, and it's actually been in a lot of places now. But Spiritism is something a little different. Spiritism also began in the 19th century, but it's based in the 19th century teachings of Allen Kardek. And while it's now robustly based in Brazil, it also is a fairly rapidly growing spiritual movement in the US. And the US Spiritist Federation is holding its 17th symposium on September 30th at Portland State University. And it's a little tradition here at Seek Reality for us to help them get the word out every year. This year, the US Spiritist Federation has sent us Peter Hayes to tell us more about it and a little bit more about Spiritism, too. Peter Hayes works at the Spiritist group Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey. He's also the current outreach director of the United States Spiritist Federation, and he's an active participant in the Tri-State Spiritist Federation as well. Peter has published children's books with his wife, who's Betty Rosen, through their company's Semi Fronteiras Press, and with other publishers in Brazil, Colombia, and the US. He's got an extensive background in theater. Boy, do I envy that. And he holds a Master's of Fine Arts in Dramatic Writing from New York University. He currently also works in commercial real estate. Peter, I'm so happy you're with us at Sun Seek Reality today. It's great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you, Roberta. It's a pleasure to be here.
Are you from Brazil? Are you American?
No, I was born in Berkeley, California.
Oh, a plain old American. See, this is becoming a more and more, I think, an American movement as well, which is to me kind of exciting because when we started doing this, everyone we talked with was from Brazil.
From Brazil, yes. There are more and more Americans who are taking interest in this. I got involved in Spiritism like many Americans because my wife is from Brazil. So I had a significant other who was Brazilian, and it was through her that I got introduced to Spiritism, which was, well over 25 years ago now. But my wife is Jewish, and we're an interfaith couple. I have a Christian background. But she was interested in Spiritism too, because in Brazil, there tends to be a tradition of people taking interest in different religious directions. So if one's Catholic, one might be interested in also Eastern religions and things like that. And so through her, originally I started learning about Spiritism, and the Spiritist group, or the Spiritist center I belong to, Spiritist group Love and Light, is the one that I started with. And so I'm here many years later, still at that center. And before that, I didn't have a strong Christian background per se, although many in my family were religious. But I was always interested in the Bible, and I remember taking a class in college on the New Testament, and that when I started reading the words of Jesus, I really became very interested in all of that. It was not the perception that I had of Christianity at all. And but I was also very interested in reincarnation even before I met my wife. It just something that about it felt very truthful to me. And then the more I learned about Spiritism, the more I gradually became very, very interested in it. And now I'm not only an active worker, I'm actually the president of the center right now. And but I got involved as a presenter, and so I've spoken on a few topics on Spiritism as well, and have been in several Spiritist symposiums in the past.
So tell us a little more about Spiritism. So I remember when I first got involved in kind of helping the Spiritist movement, I did study it, and I read some of what Allen Kardek had written, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting.
Right.
I mean, I can see why people are attracted to it. So tell us a little more about it.
Well, Spiritism is a holistic approach to life that is a mix of uh, philosophy, religion, and science. It takes all three very seriously. And it deals with the nature of spirits and their relationship between the physical world and the non physical world. Spiritism believes in reincarnation. It focuses on why we are here, what is our purpose in being here, and that we're all on a path to progressing spiritually. I would say to be a spiritist, you kind of need two basic things. You need to first believe that there is a God, or at least some kind of higher power. I understand not everybody's comfortable with the word God, but certainly believes in an all encompassing force. So Spiritism believes that God is the first cause of all things. God is certainly all good, that God is all encompassing. And there are both physical laws as well as non-physical laws, divine laws that govern the nature of our existence. The other thing I think you need to be a spiritist is believe that we do have a soul, a spirit that is immortal and that will continue beyond the body. So the exact opposite of spiritism is if you're, say, a materialist who believes that the soul, the sum total of our existence is based upon the workings of our brain and that's it. So Spiritism has the opposite approach. And so Spiritism tries to really focus on what it means to lead our lives as ethically as we can. So we follow the teachings of Jesus, the morality is laid out in Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount's a good example of that, for instance. And in doing so, it's about making spiritual progress, that every life we lead is an opportunity to learn and to grow. And because Spiritism stresses cause and effect, it's one example of how Spiritism is kind of a blend of Christianity, but it's also got elements of Hinduism and Buddhism is in it as well.
Yeah, I
When it
remember
talks
that.
about cause and effect, and that everything we do has some kind of consequence, but it's not a one size fits all. Everyone's journey is unique, and so the consequences of our actions, whatever they may be, can vary a great deal. But so Spiritism is a very optimistic approach to life in which we do believe that because we continue, it really makes a huge difference as to how we view things. Everything we go through, no matter how difficult it is just for the moment, and it's not the permanent state of things. Also, I think is important is that when Spiritism talks about material things, it's not that the material is bad. Money, for instance, is not bad. It's simply a tool. Our relationship with the physical world is an opportunity to learn. So everything that we experience through the material life is an opportunity to learn. The journeys we have in our bodies are opportunities to learn, but that stuff is not permanent. So when we become overly attached to it, something Buddhism stresses, by the way, but when we become overly attached to the physical, then that can lead to sources of unhappiness.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it made a great deal of sense. Yeah,
Mhm.
but there's not so much communicating with the dead than as
Well, there is the way it's done though is you mentioned Allen Kardec, who was a French educator in France, and in the 1850s he put together what's called the Spiritist codification, which
right.
are 5 books. The Spirit's book, 1857, followed by the Medium's book, 1861, then the Gospel According to Spiritism, which is 1863,
Yeah,
and
this is a
then
quiz, by the way.
yeah, this is the quiz. And then Heaven and Hell was 1865, I believe. And then the last book, Genesis, is 1868. So in about a 10, 12-year period of time, what we call the Spiritist codification was put together.
Uh,
Allen Kardec did this with a team of higher level spirits. So the information was all obtained through mediumship.
right.
And a lot of the source and the information we have certainly comes from the other side. Kardec makes his comments, but he was in tune to the higher level spirits. And so when we talk about Spiritist books in general, a lot of it comes through mediumship. I'll get to how mediumship is practiced in the Spiritist Center in a moment, if you like.
Sure.
But just to continue along with an overview of Spiritism, after Allen Kardek, there were other contributors to the books that we now have, especially books in English, on Spiritism. Leon Denis, for instance, was a very respected interpreter of Spiritism from France. He was a little later than Kardec, 1890s, early 20th century. And then I know in the past, when Jasara Korngold and Dan Assisi and Tanya Schwartz were here on your program, they talked about Brazil. And so what happened with Spiritism is that it started taking root in Brazil, I believe it was in the 1880s, and it continued up to this day, and it flourished in Brazil. And there were a number of important works on Spiritism that are now available in English. The medium Chico Xavier, who was considered one of the greatest mediums of the 20th century, psychographed around 490 books in his lifetime, over 60 plus period of doing so. And there's two general Spiritist authors whose works are considered very important, starting in the starting in the 1930s, going up to about the 1960s or so. The first was André Luiz, the spirit André Luiz, who was a medical doctor in Brazil. And he, Chico Xavier, psychographed, or through automatic writing, produced about 15 books from André Luiz that are about life in the spirit world. So it gives rather vivid accounts of what can happen when we cross over into the spirit world. And in some ways, the André Luiz books take the content of the Spiritist codification from Allen Kardek, which is a little more abstract at times, and it gives specific concrete examples. And then another spirit that Chico Xavier, the medium Chico Xavier, had a collaboration with was a spirit named Emmanuel, who was really the mentor of Chico Xavier. And many books were produced from Emmanuel. There were a series of novels that focus on the different incarnations that Emmanuel had, starting in Rome when he was a Roman senator, going up through the 19th, or I believe it's the 19th century. And what happened is that all of that illustrates examples of what can happen through the journey of one spirit as it goes through different incarnations. But also, Emmanuel produced several books that are more inspirational teachings, that are interpretations of phrases from the New Testament, phrases from Jesus, phrases from Paul and his letters and so forth in their meditations. And those are very short, inspirational teachings. So those are two, there's many other books by Chico Xavier that he psychographed, but those are two of the major works in English that people can read. And another important medium, just to get us up to the present, would be Givaldo Franco, who was born 1927. So if I'm doing the math right, I think he's 96 right now. And Givaldo Franco started psychographing works in Brazil in the early 1950s. And he's produced around 290 books. And there's a number of spirits that he's worked with. And one of them is Joanna de Angelis, who was a spirit who was a nun. If you look her up, she's a historic figure. And Joanna de Angelis produced several works that focus on psychology. And these works have been produced over the last 35, almost 40 years now. And more recently, about a little over a year ago, I think was the last one. And actually, the US Spiritist Symposium that we're doing on September 30th in Portland, Oregon, is in part inspired by the works of Joanna de Angelis, because the symposium takes a focus on psychology and our relationship to finding a mental balance and mental health, because the symposium is spiritual path to mental health. And if you look at the works of Joanna de Angelis, she's stresses Jungian psychology, but also transpersonal psychology as well, which are transpersonal psychology is more recent meaning the last 50 years or so approach to psychology. And so Spiritism has works up to the present is the general point. If I may continue a little bit more on the history part.
I think this is fascinating, and
Okay.
it's your movement looks a lot more modern, up to date, sophisticated
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
than what most people think of as a
Okay.
spiritual
Right.
movement, because most of them are like flies in amber.
Okay.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're like 100 years ago, people thought this, and now we
Mm-hmm.
still do the same thing.
Right. Right.
Or 1,000 years ago, people thought this. We're still doing the same thing.
Right.
Whereas yours is really quite a modern,
Mm-hmm.
up to the minute way of thinking, which
Yeah.
is very
Spiritism.
fresh.
Yes.
And that fascinated me. I remember when we first started working with the
Right.
Spiritists that we don't
Mhm.
stop learning, which is to me very, very important.
Absolutely. I mean, the Spiritist Symposium is focusing this year on psychology. It's different themes every year. But
Yeah.
Spiritism strongly advocates psychology. And there's an important creed, if you will, in Spiritism. I think Dan Assisi may have mentioned this in his program with you, which is we follow science in that if science proves that anything we think is positively not correct, then we must follow science. So, Spiritism, when it talks about not accepting the dogma of religion, that has more to do with, as you just said, having these entrenched beliefs that, this is what we thought hundreds of years ago, and we're not going to change now, no matter
Yeah.
what scientists tell us, and that kind of thing. Spiritism does not embrace that at all. Um, we certainly understand that not everyone believes in the afterlife, and that's fine. But certainly there's a lot of elements to science that Spiritism is very interested in, and certainly does talk about in modern presentations.
No, I think that's part of what engaged me when I first started studying what you all believe.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much about beliefs, it's about what you've been able to learn about what's true. I
Right.
mean, when I've studied the afterlife, there's so much about it that's real. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it's possible to be a naysayer anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not worried that you're going to disprove that. But
Right.
but there's so much that people have believed in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and in religious or spiritual terms, which just isn't true. For example, hell is a very good example. There just is no
Right.
hell. I know there's no hell.
Right.
So the fact that you're all still trying to understand what's true, and to better understand what's true, and to come up with better ways of looking at what's true, which is why I
Mm-hmm.
was very interested in
Mm-hmm.
your theme for this year, in the spiritual path to mental balance.
Right.
Well, that's up to the minute, it seems to me. If
Yes, it
anybody
is.
needed
Yeah.
mental balance, it's modern people, for
Right.
heaven's sake. I
I
mean,
mean, yeah.
that's big.
It focuses on a few things. Part of it is based on the premise that if we're only looking for external ways to find happiness and stability within ourselves, then we're going to suffer, very likely. Maybe not in the short run. In other words, like a simple example would be if I assumed that my title in life, what I do for a living, is going to make me happy and that's going to impress everybody, well, it might for a little while, but it doesn't really cause a deeper sense of spiritual fulfillment.
True.
And so that's part of it. Another part of it is that anything we're struggling with emotionally today, psychologically, has a lot to do with the prior history of our spiritual journey. What have we done in the past? What have we not done in the past? What are we here to work on within ourselves? And so when we talk about who we are, it's a combination of our experiences in this life and all the things that psychology tells us about the kind of childhood we have and whether we're repressing memories or not repressing memories. But then there's also the prior incarnations and the effects of that on us as well. By the way, Spiritism doesn't necessarily believe we need to go back and remember everything we've done in prior incarnations. Part of the argument for that is that sometimes it's just too much. If we knew everything that we did, it might be really hard to live with that.
You'd start dwelling in the past, which is not productive for now. That's right.
Exactly. It misses the point. Right? Yeah.
So how does it fit together? I mean, is there a spiritual component to our mental issues now? I mean, how does it? Have you researched that? How it works?
Yeah. The way Spiritists talk about it is that the spiritual component is based on the spirit being immortal, and that we are a product of everything that we've gone through up to this point. So there's that.
Yes.
But also we're very much connected and a part of our bodies, of course, and so there is a physiological component to it as well. Mental health, for instance, is understood as often a chemical imbalance of one kind or another.
True.
And that's true. What Spiritism adds to it, not just Spiritism, I think, but certainly Spiritism stresses, is that if there's a spiritual component to it, if we're, say, suffering from some severe mental health issue now, that might be a result of something that we've done in the past, the spirit itself is not mentally ill in perpetuity. That's an important point. In other words, we would go through a current lifetime in which we're experiencing mental health issues, depression, anxiety, fear, addictions of one kind or another. It may not be the first time we've gone through that, but it's something that the spirit has to try to work through. And another thing that Joanna de Angelis, in her books on psychology, which are one of the major inspirations of the US Spiritist Symposium for this year, Joanna de Angelis stresses the importance of consciousness, which of course is what psychologists tell us, right? That we need to have consciousness. We cannot really connect to our higher selves if we don't connect to our lower selves or have enough awareness of it so that it doesn't push us around. And that it's very important that when we talk about trying to integrate with our deeper selves, that means, who are we? Do we know who we really are? And that's, an ongoing process. But it's so important that we begin to really tap into our lower selves enough so that we can then begin to let that go a little bit more. And that process takes a while. I mean, it's different for everyone, right? Some people might let go of certain qualities that they are better off without. Maybe they can do it quickly. Others, it may take more than one lifetime. It could certainly take a full lifetime. Yeah.
So what's the role of, do Spiritists believe that we have spirit guides? Do we work with our spirit guides? Is that a part of?
Yes. Spiritists believe that we have what they often call them mentors. There's different names for them. Sometimes we don't use the word angel very much, but certainly it's the same idea, that we have a spirit that's a little more evolved than we are, not necessarily a spirit that's much more evolved, but further along than we are. And that spirit takes an active interest in what we're doing and can help us. The relationship we have with spirits in general can be kind of a complex one, because we are open to often getting suggestions from spirits. The spirits book makes the point. There's a question, I want to say it's question 459 in the spirits book, but I may be wrong. But
if you haven't memorized all of the
right.
literature,
Somebody will tell me if I'm wrong. But anyway, the question is, do spirits influence our thoughts and our actions? And the answer is more than you might think.
oh yes, that's
right.
for sure.
So it's that idea. And but it's depending upon what kind of thoughts we have to begin with. We can attract spirits that may be trying to help us, or if we're very negative in our thoughts, we may be attracting spirits that would love to encourage us into wrongdoing of one kind or another. So, but it's up to us to take the responsibility to have enough awareness and consciousness of what our regular thoughts are, that we're trying to attune ourselves more to the good rather than, say, to the negative. Actually, something I wanted to mention, you'd mentioned before about hell. There's not a hell. The fourth book in the codification, the book Heaven and Hell, what it says is it agrees. It rejects the idea that there's a permanent hell from which you can never, ever, ever get out of. What it does say, and what Spiritism tends to say, is in the spirit world, what we call hell is a reflection of our own thoughts. So if you think about it here, people who are very negative and are constantly seeing how messed up everything is, they're kind of putting themselves through hell, right? I'm sure you've had the experience of, you got somebody who's always got a problem and you try to help them or make suggestions and they can always tell you why it won't work, right? And
They're
so
in their
people
own
are
mental prison, yes.
Yes. So that's the idea. What we call hell is the prison that we create for ourselves.
Oh, yes.
And so as a general point, what we experience in the spirit world is a reflection of our current emotional state, which is subject to change. So the more we work on ourselves, the more we start to have consciousness, the more we start to improve, then the environment in the spirit world also changes. And so, again, hell, I say in quotes, is a temporary state of things. Interestingly, in the book Heaven and Hell, there was testimony from, I think, well over 60 different spirits about what their experiences are. Some are happy, some are not happy, some are called suffering spirits, which means they're kind of confused and don't quite know what's going on. Others are further along. They're spirits of criminals, they're spirits that committed suicide, and they all have had different experiences for now. I mean, it's a snapshot of where they were at the time that occurred. But again, what's optimistic about Spiritism, and it's not just Spiritism that says this, is that we are able to change, we are able to evolve, and our reality will reflect that as we go forward.
Yeah, I think that's a different way of expressing pretty much what I've come to understand too from my research. It's not permanent, and it's not. We put ourselves there.
Yes, we do. Yeah,
God doesn't put us there. It would be great if we could say God did, because then we wouldn't be responsible for it. We would love to be able to offload that responsibility, but it's all our own.
Well, one way Spiritism, I think, understands the workings of God is when we talk about divine law. It's kind of like this. What we experience in the spirit world is a reflection of our thoughts. Thought is very powerful. It's almost the engine, if you will, in the spirit world. So God has created these parameters, and we're operating within the parameters. Yes, we have free will. Up to a point, we have free will. But there are boundaries, so we can't do whatever we feel like. And one of the things that Spiritism talks about is the more we evolve spiritually, the vibration of the spirit changes. So the higher your vibration, as it will, the more you go to a place within the spirit world that's more pleasant. When your vibration's on the lower side, as a reflection of thoughts, then you might be in, they call it the lower zones. in Spiritism, which would mean spirits that are more on the suffering side.
Hmm.
And how long they stay there really depends in part on them. Sometimes they do get help, but they have to be ready to want help. And that's
Right.
key.
That's very important for
Very
people to
important. Right.
understand.
Right.
Yes.
So Spiritism strongly emphasizes that responsibility matters. Personal responsibility matters. Yeah, of course we need help sometimes. Sometimes we're stuck, but we have to want help. And if we don't want help, it's like a simple example, someone who's an alcoholic. Alcoholics can recover and put their lives in a much more positive path, but they have to want to do it. And of course, there's help if they want it. But sometimes what happens with alcoholics is they're in denial. Oh, yeah, I could stop. I could stop tomorrow. I don't
Oh,
know
yes.
whatsoever. What they
I
don't
know
do is,
someone like that right
yeah,
now.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, again, all of us have to make choices as to whether or not we want to try to make our lives better or stay where we are. Another thing Spiritism stresses, by the way, and this is in the Spirits book, the first book of the Spiritist codification, which asks well over 1,000 questions. It's more than 1,019 questions about the nature of our existence. And there's a section of divine laws that come from God, and one of them is the law of progress. And the law of progress says we will advance. How quickly we advance depends on us. So, yes, we might make good strides in one lifetime, or we may kind of coast along and just sort of hang out and not really do too much for now. But eventually, something will give us that little shove, and we will move along. We can't stay in limbo forever, so to speak.
Many people who email me want to advance, and
Mm-hmm.
they would say, they're prompting me to say, ask them how can I advance? What would you say to people who asked you that question? If I really want to advance, how do I do that?
Well, that's a tough question, but it's a good one. I think certainly important is if you think about the core of Christianity and Jesus's teachings, it's forgiveness. So
Oh, what
whether
a
we
good
have to
answer
forgive
that is.
others or forgive ourselves, both certainly, that's an important part of it. And patience is certainly key because sometimes when people want to change, that's wonderful. But if they're hoping to change everything by next week, well, it doesn't happen that way. You know, we we learn better usually we learn better when we learn slowly through trial and error. And if we can learn to forgive ourselves when we make mistakes, and this is one thing Spiritism stresses, again, the teachings of Jesus, is the importance of compassion. Compassion for ourselves, and certainly compassion for one another. And the way in which any important relationship we're in, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship, the more we can learn to accept one another for who we are, rather than I'm going to change that person, which usually doesn't work, to put it mildly.
But you can do it
Mm-hmm,
by yourself projecting the
mm-hmm,
kind of person you hope them that they will become.
right.
If you're a shining example of what you hope that they can want to become,
Mm-hmm,
then little by little they may want to become that kind of person too. But your answer was so perfect.
mm-hmm.
Forgiveness. That's what Jesus said.
Right.
And how many
Right.
times do I have to forgive when he does the same stupid thing over and over again? How many
Right.
times? Jesus
77.
said, even 7 times, Jesus? He said, no, 70 times, 7 times you need to forgive. Doesn't matter
Right.
how many times he does it wrong.
Exactly.
Always forgive.
It's very
Yes.
important. In the Gospel according to Spiritism, that's the third codification in the third book in the Spiritist codification. It talks more about the teachings of Jesus, and it talks a lot about what forgiveness is about. And forgiveness is certainly letting go. It doesn't mean we forget. Say somebody really hurts us. How are we
Mhm.
going to forget that? It's impossible. But are we going to hate them forever and ever and ever?
Just let it go.
Just let
Just
it go. Because when I was saying before about the level of a spirit's level of vibration in the spirit world, if a spirit is full of anger and hatred and that person did me wrong and I'm never going to forgive them and I'm going to get even with them, if all that's going on, that keeps our vibration very dense. And
that's
so that
right.
keeps us, yeah.
And you have to stay there with that person? No. You
No,
just
no,
love them
right.
and you bless them
Yeah,
and you move on. You don't have to stay with them.
exactly. Right. As you were just saying, I think forgiveness is about letting go.
That's
And
right.
it's essential because if we hang on emotionally to something, we're only harming ourselves.
That's right. Ah, perfect. Perfect, Peter. That's perfect. You wrote some books. So do you want to promote your books a little bit?
Oh, okay. All right. My wife, Betty Rosen, is her pen name, and we've collaborated on a few different children's books. Um, and let's see. One of them is a book she wrote primarily called A Heart Alone in the Land of Darkness. It's an allegorical story about a heart searching for an owner in a land where everyone's lost their humanity. And so the heart's trying to find someone to
That's a
connect.
children's book?
That's a children's book. Yeah.
Wow. Those are
Little
older
older
children, though,
children,
right?
not small children, but
Okay.
5 and up or so. And it's a story about compassion and acceptance,
Wow.
and the heart has to learn also to find the right one to connect with and not try to connect with anybody because that doesn't work that way. So that book
Wow.
is about that. We have a book for smaller children. We actually have one that just came out in English. Originally, we had it in Spanish and also in Portuguese, but it's called Gotta Find Froggy, in which we were making fun of ourselves because our son, when he was very small, lost a favorite toy frog of his. And I remember my wife going, "Oh my God, we lost the frog." And we tried to find it. We went back to the restaurant and the frog was gone. And we did try to get a new one, but we couldn't. But that kind of became the impetus for doing a story in which we make fun of well meaning parents that are a little over the top in trying to
Yeah.
replace the sacred frog, so to speak. And it's in part a story about that, and it's also a story about letting go.
Good.
That's for smaller children. And then for young adults, we have a book called Two Continents, Four Generations, which is a story about an American Jewish boy who gets in touch with his Brazilian Jewish heritage through the story of his grandfather. And it's based on my wife's family who left Poland in 1939, just literally days before Germany invaded in September 1st.
Wow. That was good to
And
pick it out.
yeah, my wife's oldest aunt uh, was 16 when she left. She kept a diary, but unfortunately the diary got lost, but she remembered a lot about the trip. And so she was able to interview her aunt, and we took that raw information and created a historic book that's set in two time periods. One's the journey that the grandfather and his family takes in 1939 from Poland to Brazil, which was dangerous because the Atlantic Ocean was full of German submarines sinking ships at that
Oh,
time.
my
It's not
goodness.
safe. So they had to really go on a circuitous route all the way, stay close
Oh,
to the borders of Africa, all the way down, and then back up
oh my
to
goodness.
Brazil. Um, so there's that journey in the book, and then the American boy who's is doing a modern trip in the present with his family from the U.S. to Poland, and that in part was inspired by after my wife and I were interested in this book, and we started to write it. We wanted to go to Poland, to the town her family came from. So we learned about the effects of the Holocaust on the small town that her family came from, which was a town called Piatski in southeastern part of Poland near the border with Ukraine. And it was a town that was about 6,000, most of whom were Jewish. So the town never really recovered from the Holocaust. But we
Were
learned
most
what
of the
happened.
Jews gone then?
Yeah, yeah. A few escaped, but most were murdered at the Belzec concentration camp, which was near the border with Ukraine.
Oh my.
We
Wow.
met a historian of that town who told us, a great deal of what happened. The other interesting thing about that trip, by the way, was my wife was able to find her father's birth certificate. We also found the grades that he had at the school, because typically the Nazis would destroy stuff, any records they could get their hands on. But this town had some records that were still intact. And so she was able to bring back birth certificate, marriage certificate, if I remember correctly, and things like that in Polish. But
My
and that,
goodness.
yeah, so it was a very moving trip, kind of a depressing trip, I must admit,
Yes, but to save the
very,
records of those people
oh,
are so
absolutely,
precious.
it's a very worthwhile trip, and I visited the camp Auschwitz on my own, and then we together went to another camp called Majdanek, which was on the outskirts of Lublin, and so I knew a fair amount about the Holocaust before going, but it's an eye opener to actually
So
go.
important to save that memory.
Oh yes, yes,
Never forget. Yeah.
absolutely. So our books are on a variety of topics, and then we have actually one book that's kind of a spiritist book, if you will. It's about a spirit of a young woman, a spirit named Annabelle, who wants to incarnate into a particular family. She's got the family that she's watching,
Just-
but the parents haven't decided if they're going to have a second child or not.
So
So
she's prodding them,
she's
giving them
kind of like,
dreams of a baby.
no,
Yeah.
please have another one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
And, yeah.
send me your titles of the books so I can put them
Sure.
in the
Okay.
notes.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so sorry. This has been so fascinating.
Mhm.
This I think you've told us more about Spiritism even than anybody else has. It's been
Oh,
quite fascinating. Maybe we should do
mhm.
this again.
Sure. Be happy
But
to.
we've come to the end of our time.
Okay.
What do you want people to take away from our conversation today?
Um, I certainly hope people will support the US Spiritist Symposium if they're able to. Again, it's in Portland, Oregon. It will
Now,
be
is it going to be
online.
online too?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay,
it will
so
be. Yeah.
if there's a specific,
Mhm.
because I couldn't find it, if there's a
If
specific
you,
URL, just send me the URL. We'll put that in the
okay.
notes as well.
All right.
Because
I
I have
may
the
need to
general
direct you.
URL for the Spiritists, but I
Yeah.
don't have a specific one for this.
Information for the Spiritist Symposium is on www.spiritistsymposium.org.
Okay,
Also, if you go to the website of the US Spiritist Federation, which is www.spiritist.us.
yeah, that I have. Yeah,
Yeah. And then also on YouTube, if you type in US Spiritist Federation, you'll find the several videos that we've done. Actually, something else I'll mention, if I may, real quick, is that the US Spiritist Symposium has been inspired in part, is part of, I should say, a whole program called Psychology and Spirituality, which is happening weekly. It's a weekly podcast like series on Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And every week it's a conversational podcast that focuses on some aspect of psychology from a spiritist perspective. And a lot
great.
of it's influenced by the works of Joanna de Angelis, whose works are cited in that series. But it started earlier this year, February, if I remember correctly. And there's now up to, I think we're almost at episode 30, but or close to it. And,
That's wonderful. Yeah,
yeah.
a lot of people enjoy
Mhm.
seeing videos of that sort of thing. So that'll be great.
Yeah, it's very conversational, which is what it's intended to be, and the guests on there are people that are familiar with it, with these books, and it's kind of a free flowing conversation in a way, but it's
Great.
rooted in this work.
Well, consider yourself hugged, my dear. This has been
Okay,
very enjoyable and enlightening.
back at you. Consider
And
yourself hugged as well.
and everyone, I'm so happy you were with us today. This has been really a lot of fun.
Well,
And
thank
our
you for
guest,
having me.
as you know, has been Peter Hayes, and I think this is great. We're going to have him back again, I think, just to talk about more stuff because there's a lot we have to talk about still. Meanwhile, this has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. I'm so happy you could be with us today. Please never forget, you are a powerful, eternal being. You never began, you never will end. And when you get that, it changes everything in your life for the better. Next week, our guest will be Annette Marinaccio. She's going to be with us for the second time because the first time was just not enough. Her handy new book is Your Soul Focus. She was with us actually, I think at the start of the summer, and we only got through part of her book. She's an accountant. She's a healthcare executive, and her mother-in-law died, and that got her very interested in this field. So out of the blue, she decided to do a lot of research, and then she wrote this book. I don't think anyone's ever done this that I've ever heard of, just out of the blue with such a big field. But she wrote a very good little book. Just the way an accountant would do it, just the facts. Very simple. When people suddenly have lost someone, what would they need to know? And I thought her book was great. I was so impressed with her and when we basically didn't get through the book, I said, "You've got to come right back." I put her in as soon as I could, and she's going to be back next week to basically give us the rest of the story. And I think you're going to really enjoy hearing from her again. So please just join us next week. I think you'll see why. This week, our guest has been Peter Hayes. Peter is part of basically a tradition. They always send us someone from the Spiritists just to talk about their next Federation gathering. And this time it's going to be this September 30th from 9:30 to 6 in Portland, Oregon. But frankly, I think Peter's a very interesting guy, and I just want to talk to him again. So we'll have him back again just to talk about other stuff. He's a worker at the Spiritist Group Love and Light Network in New Jersey, and he's their current outreach director from the Spiritists, the Federation. But frankly, there's a lot, I think, as you see from hearing from Peter, there's a lot that people learn when they get very involved in the Spiritists. Each person we've had that they've sent to us has kind of been, like him, kind of deep into what is an interesting movement, because unlike other people who get very involved in their religion, he's a seeker. He's been seeking, and I mean, here he could probably talk for an hour about the Holocaust. I've really have never met anybody who has done a lot of interesting stuff with the Holocaust, and that I've never talked about it myself. But that's an area that I'm very interested in, and maybe we'll have him back just to talk about that. So frankly, Spiritism, the Holocaust, there are a number of topics that I would really like to talk more about. And so we'll have him back to talk about that. But Spiritism continues to grow in the US in part because it's not a religion per se, it's a spiritual movement. And people are seekers now because the country is falling apart, and it shouldn't be falling apart. It's falling apart because the people in it are being led astray in a lot of different ways. So let's each of us individually try to find our own path toward truth. And then maybe we can lead one another back to where we should be going, and we'll lead one another back to God. And that's where I think all of us are going now. So I think Spiritism is going to be one of the ways we all do that. And now, of course, it's also time to once again mention that Seek Reality Online is your one-stop resource for all things afterlife. Just go to seekreality.com and start to learn for yourself that your own reality is eternal. Nothing else about it. It's just eternal. Learn the ultimate truth for yourself from our dear friend Craig Hogan. He's your worldwide expert on all things afterlife. Teachingsbyjesus.com is your single resource for all the beautiful divine truths that are brought to us in perfect love by the beautiful, wonderful, eternal teacher of the truth. And now finally, Emperor Constantine's religion is falling apart. So the original movement of Jesus can finally begin. Teachingsbyjesus.com is the Lord's own religion-free website. It's made by Jesus in perfect love for you. Finally, my own nonfiction books are Liberating Jesus, My Thomas, The Fun of Dying, The Fun of Staying in Touch, The Fun of Growing Forever, The Fun of Living Together, and The Fun of Loving Jesus, Embracing the Christianity that Jesus taught. For young children, there's The Fun of Meeting Jesus, which is a beautiful picture book. I wish I had drawn the pictures, but I'm not that good an artist. However, it's a beautiful book. We actually have the pictures for another of the book. If I can only find the time to write the words, we'll have another picture book for children. You can find all of these books wherever books are sold. You may have to order them, of course, but you can find them anywhere. And the adult books also are available as audiobooks, except for the last. I'm trying to find the time to do it as an audiobook, and then we'll have that one as well. If you want to talk about any of my books, or if you want to talk about anything at all, you can always contact me through the green contact block on robertagrimes.com. I answer emails if you give me your correct email address. And all of the more than 500 past episodes of Seek Reality are available wherever audio podcasts can be found. And you can listen to new audio episodes each week with the Seek Reality app that you can find for free wherever free apps are available. You also can see the new video episodes each week on Roku or Fire Stick. Meanwhile, this has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Please enjoy and make the most of this coming week in our one reality, always knowing that you, out of all the people in all the world, in all the universe, in all the universes that ever have existed or ever will exist, you most of all, you are perfectly loved.